Thank you. Thank you. So, happy good morning. And I don't want to just tell you how hard it is to run an open source project. I also want to tell you why it's worth having an open source project. And the open source project we want to talk about is called Relax and Recover. Who is using it? Thank you. Who has heard about it? Okay. So I hope by the end of this talk you will all take a note and actually go and use it, because it's solving a problem. And the problem is automated Linux recovery. Who of you is running Linux? And everybody else Windows, right? So, who of you ever had to recover a Linux computer? Okay, interesting. It's going down, you know, over the years. So, what's the problem to solve in a nutshell? Imagine you have a server, and one day your server explodes, or is lost, or hacked, or whatever. It's gone. So you get a new server, especially in the cloud, that's really cheap and quick. And the question is, of course, how does the stuff get from the old server that's gone onto the new server? And there's a lot of details you have to do to make that happen. And we call that disaster recovery or bare metal restore, depending where you're from. And I like to solve that fully automated, hands-off, quality assured, you know, like modern software doing a good job style, and then you actually can be happy. So that's the problem, and the solution is available, and it's not difficult. Automated Linux recovery. So, did you ever think about your mean time to restore or mean time to recovery? For example, after bad deployment. Anybody ever had that? Bad deployment? Me at least had it. Anybody did a bad upgrade? You know, upgrades are safe, right? Okay, still some people with us. Anybody ever deleted a LUN on their storage? You do, real IT. And anybody ever deleted the LUN of their hypervisor, which has a bigger blast radius, or lost a data center? So I also never lost a data center. But the goal that I'm following is actually, what do we do if we lose a data center? And this does happen. So business continuity is a practice that everybody should be looking at. It typically has these 4 areas, like prevention, recovery, response when it happens, getting ready, thinking about it, and very important, keep exercising. Rehearse, maintain, and review is really important. A plan that you didn't exercise is a plan that won't work. Relax and recover, or REAR as we call it, actually fits in here. It helps you to do the actual recovery. So let's look at the scope. An app. Could be anything, database, web service, any sort of app running on a computer, typically runs with other apps together on a server that typically runs with multiple other servers on a hypervisor nowadays, that typically shares more hypervisors in a data center or more. That's a typical, you know, bigger setup, and in the cloud, you just put here cloud instead of data center. It's the same idea. So the scope of Relax and Recover is actually the single server problem. Recovering a single server running Linux with whatever on it. And to understand where Relax and Recover really fits in, we need to look at change frequencies. So a typical server has like an operating system stored on some hard disk. It has applications that have data, often stored on a different hard disk. All that has configuration. And the change frequencies are actually different. Normally, the app data is changing a lot, and the OS is kind of changing much slower, or the configuration is also changing not as frequent as the application data. And Relax and Recover actually excels at slower changing stuff, which is why it's really good for everything that doesn't change so much. It's also a question of backup frequency, right? Now, what's the best tool for the job? For application data, you always need some sort of a specialized backup tool because of the change frequency. If you have an application and you take a backup once a day, it's probably always going to be outdated because you lose 1 day or 2 days worth of data of changes when you restore it. For everything else, you either have software management, configuration management, and provisioning automation, or you can use REAR to recover that. And that's why whatever you do, wherever you work, if you work in a manual or automated environment, the entire lifecycle, backup, restore, recovery, is covered by Relax and Recover. By the way, if you have questions, just shoot. So, why are backups not enough? And please, if anybody comes to you, but I have a backup, this is almost on the level as saying, but we have RAID. Right? RAID is not enough. RAID is not a backup. Backups are not enough. Because having a backup doesn't mean that you have a recovery. It's a separate thing. And I've seen cases where a backup was broken and couldn't be recovered. That's when they call in consultants and expect magic to happen. So I believe that a complete system backup is always much better than having file level, application, whatever kind of partial backups. Because there's so many things that can go wrong if you take only a partial backup, that it's always good to have, another level of confidence, of protection as a full system backup. And that leads you to a disaster recovery plan, which is really important that you sit and write it down and put it on the wall and keep exercising it. Because the whole point of a disaster recovery plan is that you work on what happens before it happens. And this is also the philosophy of Relax and Recover. Preparedness, getting ready. And automation, in my opinion, creates the disaster recovery plan that allows you to scale up or scale out with your requirements. Be it an entire cloud environment, a data center, multiple data centers, whatever. Automation is key. So Relax and Recover as the Linux disaster recovery solution is a tool that implements disaster recovery workflows, which is how we recommend thinking about this problem. It's modular, you can extend it with your own stuff, and it's well integrated. Most importantly, it runs online. So running Relax and Recover doesn't disturb your production. You just put it on as a job, cron job for example, and you're covered. And this is really important. It's like another part to your backup, and we'll come to the interaction between backup and REAR in a second. Let's just talk a moment about REAR in general. So, the name is the mission, Relax and Recover. This is what happens when nerds try to design a logo. So the idea was, leaning back, relaxing, and you can still recover by being on holiday in your hammock on the beach. So obviously open source, and the goal is really fully automate everything related to Linux disaster recovery and bare metal restore. Literally everything, end to end, the full story. And that's what makes this project somewhat unique, that it doesn't try to fill a niche and let you stand in the rain. It really tries to help you end to end. But that, of course, requires a bit of integration on your side. So what are the design concepts? Very important. Backup means every file on Linux needs to be covered in a backup. And Linux is the operating system where there's only files to be had. There's no secret magic hidden information on a Linux server or computer. It's only files, nothing else. And that's why it's easy to recover them. So Relax and Recover creates a rescue media, which we call output. And that rescue media can be used to boot a new or other computer into a rescue mode. Relax and Recover will recreate the system as it was before in terms of hard disks, partitioning, file systems, network setup, whatever, and facilitate the restore. And I'm saying facilitate because you hopefully have a proper professional backup solution. Then, very important, REAR makes the computer bootable, which is a bit of a challenge sometimes. You reboot, you're done, and then you can celebrate. And you can be happy that it took you just a few minutes of active mental time at 3 o'clock and waiting till the automation does its thing. And you can actually fully automate that, meaning start the computer from a rescue system, go back to sleep because it will recover and reboot itself into production. Up to that level, it can be automated. So REAR really specializes on system recovery. System recovery means recovering the system, and that is going beyond the actual application. So ideally, you have a backup software that does the hard job of backup. And backup is not just making a copy of all files, it's supporting stuff like incremental differential backup. Very important and really hard is squeezing and consistency. Imagine you have a database. When you take a backup, imagine you have 5 terabytes of data that need to be, snapshot point in time style stored. So backup is actually not trivial in many cases. And REAR comes and does the rest. Takes care of your system as a whole system. In case of a recovery, you take the rescue media, boot from that. REAR does all the hard job of putting the system back together as a system, and then instruments your backup software to actually restore the data. And that's the magic of REAR. REAR doesn't try to reinvent the wheels. It tries to make your backup software work better also for disaster recovery. Okay, let me ask a question. Who doesn't have a backup software in action? Okay, REAR also has a backup software built in. But that's a fallback. So how does disaster recovery look? You typically have a backup system or storage, and you have a rescue image storage. And bare metal restore means we need to deal with the bare metal, naked computer, nothing on it. So first you have a backup, then you use REAR to create the rescue media. The computer is gone, you get a new one, and you boot from the REAR rescue media, which does all the hard stuff. By the way, it comes up by default exactly with the same name, IP, and SSH keys as your original system. So logging into it is exactly as logging into your original system, which makes recovery so much easier and also helps your backup software to find its agent again. And then it restores files, finishes the system setup, reboots, and you're done. That is disaster recovery in a nutshell. Mentioned it already, backup and output. So output is always the rescue media, actually still in many cases an ISO image. Because ISO images, formerly known as CDs and DVDs, are a very kind of standardized way of booting computers from scratch. And easier to set up than network booting. It's just a file, no preconditions, no environmental setup. Give the server a file, it will boot. Give the server a disk, it will also boot. Backup is either external, which is your existing backup software, and it can be internal if you don't have any, or if this is a single system home computer style setup, then we support tar and rsync for internal backups. And here you really need to start deciding about your disaster recovery strategy. And there are actually kind of 4 questions to it. Number 1 is, what do you use for backup? Internal, external. Then, where do you put your backup if it's an internal backup? And REAR supports essentially everything you could imagine for storing backups. Finally, of course, how do you want to have your boot media? And we support, again, ISO images, bootable tapes. Anybody ever seen those except me? Yeah, you. I love you guys. Network, of course, bit of setup, and USB thumb drive, which is still super useful, actually. And then the question is, where do you put the rescue media? Because obviously, it shouldn't be on the same box, right? If you have a backup on the same computer and the computer is gone, hacked, ransomware, lost in the fire, obviously the rescue media on the same box is useless. By the way, floppy disk we don't support. It's the only thing we don't support. So for convenience, with the internal backup, you can also create combined boot and backup media. Meaning you have a single media like a USB thumb drive or even an ISO image DVD, which you can use to boot a computer and restore all the data onto it. Obviously, it doesn't work with a 5 terabyte box, but with a laptop, it probably will work. Otherwise, we typically have a separation between boot media and backup data. Often in networked environments, of course, everything comes from a network. Typically, people use NAS servers, NFS, CIFS. Typical setups are like that. There's a bit of security involved, and this is an advanced topic that we unfortunately won't be able to cover today. But REAR gives you all the means for truly secure disaster recovery setups. But it's a bit of configuration and thinking and planning required so that your first steps with REAR will be not that secure. Not that secure meaning that an attacker getting his hands on the recovery system can probably do some harm in your environment. That's just to keep in mind. Security is a feature, but it needs effort as usual. So, a few words about how to use REAR. REAR is obviously a command line application. It doesn't have a click UI. REAR is the command line. I haven't met any conflict, so I'm still happy with the name choice. Options and workflow. Options are stuff like that. Verbose, debug, extra debug. Expose secrets means you will actually find the secrets in the logs that you use in your configuration. Otherwise, we actually hide secrets. Huge hassle, but worth the effort. And non-interactive if you want to be sure that you'll never be asked a question for fully automated scenarios. And then we have the workflows. So the most important workflow is MK rescue. It creates a rescue image. Then we have MK backup, create a rescue image and take the backup if you use internal backup methods. Recover is what happens in the rescue system when you want to recover the system. And dump is super important to show the configuration. If you have a problem, please start from REAR dump and look at it. It will tell you a lot of details about the internal configuration tree, the assumptions it made, and so on. And if you ever open a ticket, please include your REAR dump output. There's also a lot of special use cases. For example, REAR supports OPA PBA booting, in case you don't like to fiddle with SED-util yourself. There's a REAR shell for development purposes, format for USB thumb drives. I'll show that in a second. And finally, REAR validate. If you're happy, please run REAR validate and follow the instructions to send us feedback, because we love feedback. So, how do you get REAR? Well, the easiest is just installing it from your Linux distro, because REAR is actually part of all Linux distributions. It's standard software. The only gotcha is it's a bit old, the version that you get. So the alternative is go to GitHub, look at our releases, and you'll get the snapshot releases of our master branch. That's up to date and works better, less bugs, more features, the usual. And of course, you can also run it from source. Make install is still a thing, and you can even run it in a portable fashion, just from the source code itself. Very handy if you have a rescue system, if you have a computer where you didn't want to install something, but still create a rescue image for those kind of scenarios. How do you configure REAR? Well, very typical, etc REAR is the configuration directory. We have a file called local.conf, which is your local configuration. And please use it only for manual, like, Vim style, I'm on the computer doing it manually configuration. We have another config file called site.conf, which is never shipped in a package. So the file doesn't exist, but you should create it via your configuration management. And the REAR packages will never interfere, and the local conf is actually empty by default. So that's how you do configuration properly. There is a default conf, and you see all the REAR stuff is under user share REAR. In the default conf, you find all the variables explained, their default set, and a lot of explanations of what you can do. So similar to maybe once reading the bash main page, scroll down the default conf to learn all the features that we can do for you. Well, very important, configuration is a bash script because REA is a bash program. And we make extensive use of bash arrays. This example you see here can be used to include the midnight commander into your rescue environment. And this shows a little bit how REA works. So we have an array called progs to which we append MC, could be multiple words here, which are just programs found in path. Plus equals is bash syntax for appending. And copy as is just means take this stuff and put it in the rescue system. And for convenience sake, you can, of course, use bash pattern matching and expansion. And that gives you very nice, concise, well, readable for admins at least, configuration. What else? Use your fantasy. Bash scripts. You can run code there. You can do whatever you want. Just, if you run code, you have to be aware that this also needs to work in the rescue system. But people have been using their fantasy to facilitate a very nice dynamic configuration system that instruments REA based on server-side configuration and what else. It's all possible, and we see that as a supported use case. Finally, you can supply additional configuration files via command line option, which is used for profiles. Like if you have a profile to take a backup on one disk and then another profile to take a backup onto a NAS storage. Then you can easily switch via that. Quick reminder, 4 configuration variables you really have to care about. One is backup. How do you do your backup? And here you see just a small selection of backup tools we support. Where the backup goes in case of internal backups, output, how do you want to have your rescue media? And these are most output types, there's even more. And of course, where should we put that? So REA obviously supports uploading it to different places. And again, default conf for everything. Let's look at an example. So, who can guess how many lines I have in a production configuration? How many? 5. 4? Any other wagers? Okay. Well, here's number 1. Obviously, you want to get your rescue image off the system, right? So you always find output URL. In this example, it's an FTP drop folder. This means FTP to that without authentication and uploads files into the DR path, which obviously implies that the FTP server will do some magic with it, like storing it securely. Because, everybody could do that. Well, we have to say how we plan to do backups. In this case, I chose TSM as the example. TSM is the IBM backup tool. Anybody using that? Very nice. And finally, there's still a bit of a weakness around secure boot. So often you have to supply a secure boot line. This counts as one line, was one click, and that's it. 3. So actually, very few lines of REA configuration are normally enough. Normally meaning production use case, a well-supported backup software like TSM, which I implemented, I guess, 15 years ago, which is quite scripting friendly, and it just works. And then you set up a cron job that runs MK rescue once at night, whatever, and you're covered. You scale that out, and all your data center, all your cloud environments are covered. That's it. That's all you need for preparedness. Plus, of course, a full backup in TSM, yes. But that's not so hard, and TSM does deduplication, so it's okay. Let's look at another example. That's my development configuration on my home computer where I use virtual machines to do testing. So it's a bit longer, and you see I'm using NFS to store my outputs. By the way, output ISO is the default. I'm using NetFS, the internal backup method, store the backups in the same place. These things here in the middle, they save a lot of time and disk space for the rescue image. Because by default, RIA will take all the firmware files and all the kernel modules and all the drivers and make sure that the rescue image can boot on anything, in the assumption that you might do a recovery on a completely different hardware than what you had originally. Now, in the case of virtual machines, that's overkill, because the new virtual machine will use exactly the same hardware as the old one. So for virtual machines, you can use those two lines to save a couple hundred megabytes of the rescue image. Scaling out with thousands of virtual machines is a lot. And if you don't care about MD5 sum verification in the rescue image, then you can skip that, save a minute or so on the creation. This is a nice example of an advanced RIA feature. When you recover hardware on different hardware, it might be that the 240 gigabyte SSD in the new server is a little bit smaller than the 240 gigabyte SSD in the old server. Why? Vendor change. So RIA supports recovering on smaller hard disks if the available disk space supports shrinking. And there's a kind of auto shrink size where RIA will just silently accept it and say, yeah, it's gonna be okay. That's what you meant. And again, secure boot. So that's how I develop. Again, not so many lines, easy to configure and easy to work with. Just maybe a few words about the internal backup. So NetFS, it's called because we put files somewhere else. It supports literally everything you could dream about: tapes, disks, more portable disks, anything, file shares, of course. NAS-top boxes are being typical. Here's a complete list of the backup URLs that we support. You see file is local, obviously only for special use cases. NFS, CIFS, USB, that's how you target a USB thumb drive or any other external storage. USB means external storage. ISO is, I want to have my backup in an ISO image, and tape, if you still have those, are actually fully supported. And you'd be laughing. Single server, remote location, bootable tape is a really valid option because it's super simple and fairly foolproof. And RIA can fully automate the entire backup and restore process, including bare metal restore. So, who has disaster recovery for their Linux laptop? Who else has a Linux laptop? Who didn't raise their hand? Okay, here's your homework. So, if you have a Linux laptop, carry it to a conference. There's always an unfortunate, significant little chance that you won't carry it back home for whatever reason. Unfortunately. So, here is how you can create a disaster recovery backup of your laptop. The RIA configuration looks like that. I added here some stuff which is default. So backup is NetFS. Backup URL is disk by label, and we choose RIA-000 as the default label for this kind of stuff. This is a default setting. I just put it here for consistency, that you see what's happening. Output is USB. UDEV workflow is MK backup. UDEV workflow is a workflow that can be triggered via a UDEV rule. I'll show you in a second. And of course, again, secure boot. So what you do is you plug in some removable storage. Let's say it's on SDB, and run RIA format dev SDB. RIA will partition and create a file system and format that removable storage with a file system that has this label. Then you add a UDEV rule that looks like this. So when we add a blocks device that has an FS label called RIA-000, then run user sbin RIA UDEV. And this is where the UDEV workflow up there comes into play. That means whenever this happens, it will run a special RIA UDEV command, which will internally run the MK backup workflow, and then beep loudly for you to remove the storage. So this even works on systems that don't have a screen attached. That's it. And when you need to install a fresh laptop, you just boot from that, wait a little, and you're done. Not so hard, right? Okay, advanced stuff. I love Output Portable, 5 megabyte, runs on any other system like Ubuntu Live CD. Mappings can be used to facilitate mass migrations. That's actually how P2V support was added to rear. You can add pre and post commands to do stuff, hooks. You can set an SSH password, which is off by default. Lots and lots and lots of features. Very important, keep in mind, rear is bash. So if you know bash, you can code in rear. This is the structure. The most important thing to remember is rear is a multi-dimensional script merging framework, meaning it figures out some environmental information and then it puts together scripts from different subfolders under user share rear to do the actual work. If you do an LSLR under that, you will immediately see what I mean. And for playing around, there's a script called run in Docker, which allows you to run rear code in specially crafted Docker images on all distributions that we actually try to support. Very handy to find out if a given tool is supported on all distros. So let's talk briefly about the open source project. We have 7 active maintainers, 193 other contributors, and rear is really, really active. Not a day goes by without some action in pull requests and stuff like that. So a really actively maintained, alive project. I would like here to really shout out a big thanks to all the other maintainers who spent their time, a lot of them unpaid, free hobby time, to support Relax and Recover. The achievements. It's the de facto standard tool for Linux bare metal restore. I'm not aware of any other tool that even comes close to what Relax and Recover can do. And it has plenty of backup software integrations. Can you quickly read through that and tell me if you use one that's not listed?
Well, Veeam is not listed here, but was earlier, right?
Oh, I forgot that. Thank you. Yes, Veeam is supported. Good catch. Nobody has any backup tool we don't support? You use? Q? Cohesity. Okay, and you use?
I think I don't see any NetApp related things.
Nope. Very good. So, what's the business value for rear users? It's very simple. You pay about 25K for an integration project, which is a consulting project with me, for example, to add support for whatever backup software to Relax and Recover. Actually, 25K is really the upper limit. I've never had a single integration that takes more than that. Most of them take even less. And commercial disaster recovery tools will easily cost you 100K per year for doing less, for being less versatile, less automated, less powerful, less useful. So this is a very good example for why open source makes sense from a business perspective. Not for idealistic enthusiasm, whatever, fixing the world reasons, for business reason. It's cheaper and better. And you get more development and better quality. So we actually have an ecosystem surrounding Relax and Recover. Red Hat and SUSE have it as part of their official documentation and officially ship Relax and Recover as their disaster recovery tool. If you look on SUSE HA extension, it's covered there. Red Hat similar, Red Hat Enterprise Linux covers Relax and Recover. So if you have RHEL or SUSE subscriptions, you can ask them for support and you will get it. And one of the maintainers will actually answer you. and fix the stuff upstream and maybe even backport it into their outdated ancient version. And we have a sister project, Disaster Recovery Linux Manager, which is kind of automation surrounding using REAR. And two backup vendors, SAP CSAM and Bereos, chose REAR as their standard Linux disaster recovery tool. So, for me, this is really the most important point here, because it shows that commercial vendors choose an open source project over developing their own stuff. There's no bigger approval you can get as an open source project than that. Unfortunately, I have tried to talk with other vendors unsuccessfully about the same. So if you have contacts to a backup vendor or software vendor, please help me to talk with them on a product manager business level. And I'll try to convince them that it's cheaper and better for them to support REAR over developing their own solution. And that as an open source project, we're super happy to accommodate whatever needs they have. Maybe 2 words about the history. There was actually a precursor written by one of the maintainers, Gratien de Hez, who started earlier and then decided, I managed to convince him, he decided to switch over to REAR. REAR started in 2006, has been steadily growing. In 2 years, we will be celebrating 20. I hope all of you will be happy REAR users by then. And it's still an ongoing development effort, and we still keep adding crucial features. So what goes well? User support via GitHub. We have a lot of small contributions by end users, like fix here, feature there, really nice, super cool. We have SUSE and Red Hat on board. Unfortunately, Debian, Ubuntu are not on board. I don't have any contacts there. If you can help me, very happy. And we even managed to deprecate ancient stuff like Bash 3. So what doesn't go well? Well, documentation, obviously. Testing. We can test REAR, but we cannot test backup software integrations. So we rely on users of REAR and backup software to help us with that, to either test themselves and give us feedback, or to hire us to test stuff on their behalf in their environments. And also cross-platform architecture, like, non-x86 testing is a bit difficult, again, for lack of systems. There is an automated testing project, started as a consulting project, on pause for lack of funds. SUSE does manual testing, Red Hat has some automated testing. It's all, bits and pieces, nothing really reliably, because, again, nobody pays for releases. And that's the main topic. The things that are unpleasant or hard or inconvenient, unfortunately, don't happen in an open source project, because people working in the project, they still need to make a living. It's not all hobbyism. So that's the downside of not having a business plan and commercial and whatnot. So if you look at the release history, you see there were years where we had been very, very busy. And then it goes down to about once a year, and now we're at about once every 2 years. Doesn't mean that changes don't happen. It just means nobody has time to create a release, which is why I recommend everybody go use upstream snapshots. They're actually quite stable, and if there's a bug, we fix it immediately. So hopefully this year we'll make the jump to 3.0. It's an ongoing discussion. Come to GitHub and pitch in with your opinion. So what are we trying to do? Snapshots, sponsoring. I'm standing here, trying to raise awareness. We can do workshops. If anybody wants to do commercial activity, please go ahead, earn money with REAR and contribute back to the project. Would be lovely. Actually, REAR needs you, obviously, as users or as customers. And if you don't have a disaster recovery plan set for your environment, please start working on that and use REAR. It's the best tool for the job. So I hope I managed to convince you that in case of a disaster, if you are prepared, you can just relax and recover. Please keep in mind, no backup, no mercy. That's unfortunately still the case, and we will not change that for you. We will just automate what you do with your backup. We have a homepage. We do keep it up to date, so go have a look. And finally, we have maybe 2 minutes for questions. If there's anything I can do to help you, I'd be happy to do so. I'm a consultant. I do that for a living. I have a homepage where you can find my talks. This talk will be on my homepage in an hour with the slides, and maybe tomorrow or day after tomorrow with the video. If there's anything else I can do for you, I'd be happy to do so. Actually, Relax and Recover is my hobby project. I'm working in IT strategy consulting and doing bigger things like business continuity management, disaster recovery plans, revamping your IT organization, stuff like that. So if I can help you with that, please talk to me later. I'm super easy to find at this conference. Look for Automate. And thank you very much for being here this early in the morning and learning about Relax and Recover.